Minutes after my divorce became final, I stood on the courthouse steps and called my dad. Lock out all 27 employees my in-laws planted in the company. Right now. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. For 6 years. Those people sat inside payroll, purchasing, shipping, and internal controls, draining millions while my husband told me I was imagining things. By sunset, every account was frozen. That same night, my mother-in-law showed up at my house, pounding on the door and screaming my name, but she wasn't there to save their jobs. She was there to stop me from finding the hidden 28th name. I was 36 when I walked out of that courthouse, but the story had started 8 years earlier, when I still believed marrying Ryan Parker meant I was gaining a second family. Back then, I was 28, newly promoted, and still trying to prove I deserved a place beside my father. Thomas Bennett had spent almost 40 years building a steel manufacturing business from one rented warehouse and a used pickup truck. He knew every foreman by name. He still drank coffee from the same chipped blue mug he had owned when I was a kid. On my 30th birthday, he handed me documents giving me 25% ownership. Then he gave me a gray blazer. "You wear this when you are ready to lead," he said. I laughed and told him I was nowhere near ready. He looked at me over the rim of that old mug. "You will be." Ryan loved that story. At least, I thought he did. He used to stand behind me while I got ready for work, smooth the shoulders of my jackets, and tell me I looked like someone people would trust in those early years. He made me feel safe in a way I had never known I needed. His mother, Diane, was different. She never asked for anything directly. That would have been too obvious. At our first Thanksgiving dinner, she passed me sweet potatoes, smiled, and mentioned that Ryan's cousin Mark had been laid off. "He is wonderful with numbers," she said. "It would be such a blessing if family could help family." I wanted her to like me. More than that, I wanted Ryan to see me as generous. So I arranged an interview. Mark got a job in purchasing. A few months later, Diane mentioned Scott, a relative on her side who had logistics experience. Then came someone for payroll, then another person for internal controls. Each request arrived wrapped in a sad story, a compliment, or a reminder that successful families should lift others up. None of them seemed dangerous alone. Ryan always called it kindness. My father trusted my recommendations because he trusted me. I trusted Ryan because I loved him, and Diane understood exactly how to move through the space between those two things. By the time I turned 35, her people were scattered across every department that touched money, contracts, shipping, or oversight. One evening, I stayed late to review staffing costs. The factory floor had gone quiet except for the hum of the vents and the metallic ticking of cooling equipment. I traced the names on the employee list with my finger. Cousin, in-law, family friend, former neighbor, 27 connections. It did not look like generosity anymore. It looked like placement. The first warning was so small I almost ignored it. A supplier bill showed a storage charge nearly twice what we had paid the year before. When I asked Mark about it, he slid a printed comparison across my desk and said fuel costs had changed everything. The numbers looked clean. Too clean. A week later, one of our largest customers called to complain that a steel shipment had arrived 3 days late. Scott blamed bad weather. The sky had been clear all week. Then I found consulting payments with no work attached. Bills split into amounts small enough to avoid a second approval, and vendor contracts that kept circling back to businesses connected to Diane. Every time I raised a question, Ryan had an answer ready. One night, I spread copies across our kitchen table while the dishwasher hummed behind us. "Something is wrong," I said. Ryan came around the table, rubbed my shoulders, and lowered his voice the way he always did when he wanted me to doubt myself. "You are exhausted. You see patterns because you are looking too hard. I am looking because money is disappearing." He pulled away. "Do you hear yourself? These are people we know." By the end of the conversation, I was the one apologizing. That became our pattern. I found a problem. Ryan softened his voice. Diane called the next day with a story about loyalty, gratitude, or how hurt someone felt. Then I backed down to keep the peace. But the delays got worse. Vendor costs climbed even when market prices held steady. Longtime employees were passed over while Diane's relatives moved into positions that controlled purchasing, payroll, shipping, and review. One cold Saturday morning, I drove to the storage facility Scott kept billing us for. There was no warehouse. There was a cracked fence, weeds pushing through gravel, and one rusted loading sign leaning sideways behind a strip mall. I sat in my car with the heater running, staring at an empty lot our company had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to use. That was when fear replaced doubt. I hired Megan Foster, a forensic accountant, and paid from my personal funds. We met at a coffee shop outside the city where nobody from work would recognize me. She never promised me a scandal. She only promised to follow the money. 3 months later, she showed me a list of connected vendors, repeated payments, and approval chains that always led back to the same small circle. There was also one internal access account that appeared whenever a questionable payment moved forward. No employee name, no department, just an authorization level high enough to see everything. I needed to know whether Ryan was protecting his family or actively helping them. So I lied to him. I mentioned a fake audit of a department we had not reviewed. I told him only that records would be checked Monday morning. Within hours, Mark tried to access those exact records from home. When I confronted Ryan, he did not deny warning them. He looked at me across our bedroom and said, "Your family has more than enough. Why should mine get nothing?" Something inside me went still. I stopped trying to save my marriage. I started preparing to save my father's company. I moved into the rental house 3 weeks before the divorce was final. It was small, clean, and painfully quiet. Half-open boxes lined the living room. One coffee mug sat beside the sink. At night, the heater clicked on and off while I replayed every conversation Ryan had ever made me apologize for. My gray blazer hung from the bedroom door. Every morning, I saw it before I saw myself. Megan finished her investigation 11 months after our first meeting. She called on a Tuesday and asked me to come alone. At the coffee shop, she had chosen the table near the window, the same place where I once sat with my back to the door, afraid someone would recognize me. This time, I faced the entrance. Megan placed a folder between us. 27 employees are connected to the Parker family, she said, but they did not all play the same role. She showed me the pattern. A smaller group controlled purchasing, shipping, payroll, and internal review. Bills were inflated, payments were split. Contracts were steered toward businesses tied to Diane. The fake storage site had charged us for years. The total was just under $4 million. Then Megan showed me the internal access account. It belonged to Ryan. He had not approved the payments himself. He had done something quieter. He watched the reviews, tracked my questions, and warned his family whenever I got too close. I stared through the window at cars moving along the wet street for months. Part of me had hoped he was weak, not disloyal. That hope died without making a sound. Rachel Morgan, my attorney, helped me build the next steps. We preserved the records, separated my finances, and prepared a lawful response for every employee involved. No one would be punished because of a last name, but no one would be allowed to erase evidence either. So I waited. I signed divorce papers while Ryan told friends I had become cold and obsessed with work. Diane sent messages about forgiveness. Mark suddenly requested access to old vendor records. I answered none of them. The morning the judge finalized the divorce, I wore the gray blazer my father had given me 6 years earlier, outside the courthouse. Cold wind pushed against the folder in my hands. I called my father before I lost my nerve. "Dad, I need you to lock out all 27 employees my in-laws planted in the company." Silence. Then I told him everything: the fake warehouse, the bills, the payments, Ryan's account, nearly $4 million gone over 6 years. "I recommended some of them," I said. "This happened because you trusted me." My father breathed out slowly. "You trusted the wrong people," he said. "That is not the same as betraying me." My eyes burned. "Send me the evidence." Within minutes, Rachel, Human Resources, and outside counsel joined a secure call. By noon, access was suspended for all 27 pending individual review. Unfinished payments were frozen. Records were backed up. Each person received administrative leave and a chance to respond. At 2:17, Mark tried to sign in from home. At 2:24, Scott told a junior employee to move shipping records off-site. At 2:31, Ryan called a supervisor and asked whether the system was still accessible. Thank God I had made that call when I did. That evening, I was unpacking plates when someone pounded on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw Diane on my porch, and the first thing she shouted was, "Not." "What did you find?" It was. "How much did you save?" Diane's voice came through the door before I opened it. "You have no idea what you've done." I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door nearly shut behind me. The cold hit my bare ankles. Diane stood under the yellow porch light in a camel coat, one side of her hair flattened by the wind. I had never seen her look untidy before. "You locked out 27 people," she said. 27 families, 27 employees are under review. Don't play games with me. Jennifer." Her finger lifted toward my face. "You will restore their access tonight. You will stop this ridiculous investigation. And you will call Ryan before you destroy what is left of your marriage. My marriage ended this morning. That can be fixed." "No." The word came out quiet. That seemed to frighten her more than shouting would have. Diane's expression changed. The anger softened. Her shoulders lowered. "Ryan still loves you," she said. "He made mistakes. We all did. But families handle things privately." "You mean quietly. I mean with loyalty." I looked at the woman who had spent 8 years wrapping every demand in that word. "No one is being punished for being related to you," I said. "Each person will be reviewed based on what they did. You have nothing. We have the records. We have the payment history, and some of your people are already cooperating." For 1 second, her face went blank. Then she smiled. It was small and cold. "You think they will choose you over blood?" "They are choosing themselves." She stared at me, and I finally understood why she had come in person. She was not there to argue about fairness. She was trying to learn who had talked. I stepped back inside. "You need to leave. This is not over." "No," I said. "It is finally starting." 3 days later, we met in the main conference room at the plant. Megan sat beside Rachel with stacks of records arranged in front of them. My father took the chair at the end of the table. I sat to his right in the gray blazer. Mark arrived with an attorney. Scott came alone. Ryan entered last and would not look at me. Megan began with the storage site. She showed the bills, the payments, and photographs of the empty lot. Then came the inflated vendor contracts, the consulting charges, the repeated approvals that had been split into smaller amounts to avoid review. Mark leaned forward. Scott handled logistics. Scott snapped back. "You approved every vendor. I approved what your department submitted. You told us which ones to use." Their voices climbed over each other until Rachel raised one hand. Then 2 junior employees were brought in separately. Both gave the same account. Mark had told them to divide bills. Scott had told them to remove storage references from routine reviews. Diane's name had never appeared in writing, but her businesses received the money. Ryan stayed silent until Megan displayed his access history. Every time I raised a concern, his account opened the same records within hours. Rachel turned to him. "Did you share internal information with your mother or her relatives?" Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. "I warned them that Jennifer was asking questions, why they said she was trying to push them out." I looked at him. "Did you ever choose me when choosing me cost you something?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. That silence hurt more than an excuse would have. A week later, Diane's attorney sent a letter threatening a wrongful termination lawsuit and public claims of discrimination. Rachel responded with a summary of the evidence and a simple statement if Diane filed. The company would provide the preserved records, witness statements, payment trails, and related contracts to the court and cooperate with any lawful review. The threat disappeared within 48 hours. By then, Mark had stopped blaming Scott. Scott had stopped blaming the junior staff. Ryan had stopped calling, and Diane had lost the 3 things she had always used to control everyone around her: access, silence, fear, for the first time since I had known her. Diane had nothing left to demand. The investigation lasted 9 more weeks. 19 employees were terminated for approving false bills, hiding conflicts, moving records, or benefiting from the scheme. 4 resigned before their interviews were complete. 4 others stayed because the evidence showed they had not taken money and had cooperated as soon as they understood what was happening. That mattered to me. I had spent months afraid that protecting the company would turn me into someone who punished people just for sharing a last name. It did not. We followed the facts, one person at a time. Mark and Scott faced civil claims for part of the losses. Diane's storage business closed before the end of the year, but shutting its doors did not erase the payment history Rachel had preserved. My father refused to turn the case into a public spectacle. He did, however, make one thing clear. If anyone with authority asks for the records, he said, they get everything. Ryan called me once. It was late, and rain tapped against the kitchen window of my rental house. His name appeared on my screen, and for several seconds, I just watched it glow. When I answered, he sounded smaller than I remembered. Did you ever believe I loved you? I closed my eyes. Yes, I said. I believe you loved me. You just needed your mother's approval more than you needed to protect our marriage. He was quiet. Then he said, I'm sorry. I had imagined hearing those words for months. When they finally came, they did not heal anything, but they did set me free. The company did not recover overnight. The first month was messy. We had late meetings, temporary managers, and people doing 2 jobs while Daniel Reed rebuilt purchasing and shipping. Then the numbers began to change. Deliveries stabilized, longtime employees were promoted, competitive bids replaced private favors. Within several months, vendor costs dropped by about 20%. Nearly a year after the lockout, we posted our strongest results in years. That spring, my father gathered everyone on the factory floor. The air smelled like machine oil and hot steel. The same blue mug sat on a folding table beside him. I wore the gray blazer. Thomas told the employees that trust had been abused, but the people who truly built the business had protected it. Then he announced that I would take over as president. Applause rolled across the floor. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. Diane had not been ruined by revenge. She had simply lost access to what was never hers. Ryan had lost the marriage he refused to defend, and I had finally stopped confusing silence with love. For the first time in years, the company felt like my father's legacy again, and my life felt like mine. I used to think protecting a family meant keeping its secrets. Now I know better. Love does not ask you to ignore betrayal. Loyalty does not require silence, and setting a boundary is not revenge when the truth is what finally draws it. Sometimes I still think about that courthouse morning, the cold steps beneath my shoes, and the gray blazer pressed against my shoulders. My hands were shaking then. They are not shaking anymore. Maybe you have had to protect someone you love from the very people who claimed to love them most. If this story felt familiar, share yours in the comments, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one.